Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to break down something pretty intense, the global shockwaves of a hypothetical but very plausible conflict, the 2026 Iran war.
Okay, so right off the bat, a quick heads up. We are absolutely not predicting the future here. What we are doing is digging into a fictional but really well-detailed scenario to see how a single conflict could send ripples across the entire planet. It's all about understanding just how connected everything really is.
And to really get a sense of the scale we're talking about, just look at this quote. The head of the IEA called it the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Wow. I mean, that one line pretty much sets the stage for everything we're about to cover.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at how this whole thing kicks off. Then, we'll dive into the world's biggest oil choke point, the massive energy crisis that follows, and wrap up with the really interesting strategic moves from Russia and China.
All right, first things first, how did we even get here? To understand the global fallout, you've got to understand how the fire started in the first place.
So, yeah, this war didn't just happen overnight. Not at all. As you can see, it was a slow burn, a buildup over years. It starts with escalating tensions from the Gaza war back in 2023, then a more direct but limited conflict in 2025, all culminating in these full-scale strikes.
By April of 2026, things are just off the rails. It's a full-blown, ongoing war. We're talking assassinations of top officials, including Iran's supreme leader. Iran is firing back at Israel and U.S. allies. But the real game changer? Their move to seize control of this one critical waterway. That's what flips the switch from a regional war to a full-on global economic meltdown.
And that leads us right here. Because Iran's most devastating weapon in this whole scenario isn't a missile or a drone, it's control over this tiny but unbelievably important strip of water.
So what is the Strait of Hormuz? Well, think of it like the neck of a bottle. It's the only way for ships to get in or out of the Persian Gulf. It is, without a doubt, one of the most critical choke points for global trade on the entire planet. You just can't overstate how important it is.
And this number says it all. 1/5. Let that sink in. A full 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply has to pass through this one tiny passage. It's not an exaggeration to call it the jugular vein of the global economy.
You know, before the war, if you were to look at this place from space, you'd see a constant stream of ships. It's like a floating superhighway, just a non-stop 24/7 flow of oil and gas tankers powering the world.
And then, after the war starts, it just stops. That superhighway becomes a ghost town. Shipping companies are not going to risk their multi-billion-dollar tankers getting hit by a mine or a drone, so they just pull the plug. The traffic dries up almost overnight.
And look, when you turn off a tap that big, it doesn't just stop the ships. It's like slamming on the emergency brake for the entire global economy. The shockwaves hit everywhere, and they hit fast.
What you're seeing here is literally the biggest hit to the world's oil supply since the crises in the 1970s. I mean, just look at that jump. We're not talking about a gradual increase. The price of oil nearly doubles in about a month, from $65 a barrel to $120.
Oof. And here's something that's so easy to miss. This isn't just about pain at the pump. The Strait of Hormuz is also a highway for almost half of the world's key fertilizer ingredients. So when that gets cut off, you've got a problem. Suddenly, we're staring down the barrel of a global food crisis, with fuel and fertilizer costs sending food prices through the roof. It's like the 2022 crisis all over again, but worse.
Okay, so while most of the world is in full-on panic mode, for other major players, all this chaos, well, it creates some very interesting and very complex opportunities. Let's start with Russia. Remember, they're a huge energy producer, but they're also under heavy sanctions.
For Moscow, this whole thing is a real double-edged sword. On one side, it's a huge win. The world is desperate for oil, so the U.S. actually has to ease up on some sanctions against Russian oil just to calm the markets. That's a huge injection of cash for Russia's war effort. And, maybe even more importantly, it pulls the U.S.'s focus completely away from other places, like Ukraine. But there's a flip side. Some experts point out that in the long run, this could actually be a strategic loss for Russia. A more powerful Iran could start to challenge Russia's own influence in the Middle East.
All right, now let's turn to China. As a country that imports a ton of its energy, this war creates an even more complicated puzzle for Beijing to solve.
So for Beijing, this is a real balancing act between a huge strategic opportunity and a massive economic headache. The opportunity? The U.S. gets bogged down in a Middle Eastern quagmire. They're even reportedly pulling missile defense systems out of Asia to send them to the Middle East. For Beijing, that is a massive win. It lets China step up and try to frame itself as the new pillar of stability. But the headache is just as big. China suddenly loses access to all that cheap, sanctioned oil from Iran. And the risk of a global recession, that could absolutely wreck their export-heavy economy.
So all of this brings us to one final, really big question. This whole scenario shows just how fragile our interconnected world is. You can have these short-term wins for some countries, right? But the long-term threat of a total global economic collapse hangs over everyone. Which really makes you wonder, when you block a key artery of global trade like this, does anyone really win? Or in the end, does everybody just lose?